I have your attention, please? This lecture is on Salvador Dali, D-A-L-I, and Marc Chagall, C-H-A-G-A-L-L. Put in the first slide, please. We're going into a different vein of painting today with two surrealist artists. During the 1920s, following the First World War, there was a great period of sort of international sophistication. All of this came from the abstractions begun by Picasso in the Cubist period, which was the offshoot of Cézanne with his studies of geometrics and paintings. But mainly, modern art had its roots, its foundations, between the years of 1910 and 1914. We had Cubism with Picasso and Braque. We had Futurism with the Italian painters that showed a tremendous amount of force, speed, quickening of action. Most of the years between 1914 and 1918, the war years of the First World War, the artistic climate declined. And then immediately after the war periods of this great feeling of the nations having been sort of brought back together, this international but a very sophisticated, fast-moving, modern-paced world. It seems that there is always a tremendous growth following a period of devastation. And in the 20s, we have two artists. There were quite a few surrealist artists, but the two I've selected are quite different. But both of them are considered surrealist artists, mainly because of their attitude toward their painting. Now, if you take the word surreal, it means beyond realism, more real than real. It goes into the subconscious. It goes into otherworldly things, that where the objects themselves sort of leave the world of reality, and yet many of the surrealist painters, like Magritte and Dali, paint things in an extremely real fashion. All right, so you have a dealing almost like Redon did earlier, but he was not a surrealist painter. He would be called a mystical painter or a supernatural painter. But these artists, like Max Ernst, Dali, René Magritte, Yves Tanguy, Marc Chagall, all dealt in a very personal nature in their painting. Salvador Dali is probably one of the most appealing and most well-liked, mainly because he's still alive today, and we know him about as well through his own personality and his hijinks and his personal appearances on TV shows as we do through his painting. Slide, please. One of the earliest of Dali's paintings that has certainly taken on sort of a classic nature because it has epitomized the feelings of this school of painting by many jokes, fun being made of it, etc. But it is called The Essence of Time. Now, most of the surrealist painters use some general characteristics within their work. Mainly they have like objects floating, but they're not tied to the ground. There's a lack of reality. They have vast distances of where, with the use of one-point perspective, their canvases go way, way back to infinity. And then Dali will do some things like this. In this painting, which is in the Museum of Modern Art collection, is only about 8 by 10 inches. It's a tiny little thing. But it established the cause of the surrealist painters and caught the fancy of the art world. The clocks that sort of slide off the edge of the table in a melted fashion have sort of a languid quality to them. The time is stopped or it's moving very slowly. The tremendous distance that goes way, way back beyond the horizon line that creates infinity on the canvas creates an open, empty situation. The form that the center clock lies on has never been explained by anybody, including Dali himself. It is just the form that appears in the foreground. And then the back of the watch, of the red object that's in the lower left-hand corner, is covered with little ant or bug forms crawling all over it. Dali is a showman in his own life and in his paintings. Many of his paintings are tour de force of optical illusions, of little details that he loves to put in. The surfaces of a Dali painting is immaculate, crisp, smooth, beautifully worked out. Probably is one of the contemporary artists, he's one of the greatest craftsmen of all the artists of the 20th century. Slide, please. These are in chronological order so that you can sort of see the development of his paintings. But he was a surrealist painter from the word go. He's Spanish by birth, from Catalan, which is considered, very intellectual area of Spain. But there are also some really characters that come from that area too. Slide, please. He has gone through several periods. The early style, which it just sort of presents this mystical, unreal world. And then in the 40s, he went into a metaphysical relationship, as the subject matter became more cosmic, as he said. And then he went through a religious phase. And he's just painting now. He's living in Spain. Slide. He dealt greatly with things of birth of the man. He says he remembers things while in his mother's womb. This may be part of his showmanship. But the idea of birth, not only of the human, but of the birth of ideas, the birth of worlds, of other worlds too. And he uses this sort of marvelous form of this sort of drape thing, the world being the egg and the human form breaking out of the egg shell. Slide, please. Most of Dali's titles are just about as fanciful as his paintings. He has been married to the same woman for, I think, 40 or 50 years now, and credits much of his success to her. He should, because she's a very shrewd businesswoman. She sort of manages the creative artist, does the business side of it. And her name is Gala, and he has painted her many times, this being a dual portrait of Gala. And he feels that she is such an influence on his paintings and has been such an inspiration that most of the times he will sign his paintings Gala Dali. Slide, please. This is one of the tricks that Dali likes to use in his paintings, the now you see it, now you don't sort of thing, of where there's a superimposed image over the canvases. They're quite charged with sort of emotional feelings of this sort of otherworldliness and unrealness. They have sort of a weird sense to them which appeals to many people. Slide, please. His creation of forms are highly imaginative, like the almost skeletal figures with the drawers extending from the thigh. And with most of the surrealist painters, they're extremely symbolic, with the burning giraffe that appears in many of his paintings. And then he finds a form that he sort of likes in these props of these growths that come out of the back spine of the figure in the background. And they're sort of like wobbly sticks that are holding up these appendages. Slide, please. Slide, please. But the technical ability of Dali is superb. He is a craftsman. He knows how to use his brush, how to manipulate his paint. And the thought of perspective of the geometric pattern in the right side of the sort of table with the still life floating about madly, the piece of rock that floats above it, so meticulously done to show the texture of it. And then the ocean in the far left is almost stylized into a design that does not seem to go with the rest of it, but it forms a very nice, quiet area behind all the the still life things that are floating up in the middle of the air. Slide, please. These sort of melty shapes, amorphic shapes as he called them, were very popular in his work. Slide, please. And this is something that he calls a self-portrait of himself at the age of 4, although he portrays himself as a female. He is quite verbal on his paintings, and there would be meaning of why the dog would be underneath the sort of sheet of water. Slide. This is based on the Pantheon, and it's a classic head. Dali is, in a sense, a classic painter. He has great ties with the perfection of the Greeks in his compositions and his ability, technical ability. Slide, please. In one of his Madonnas, for most of his Madonna paintings, he would use his wife as a model. Slide, please. I'm sorry this slide is a little dark, but it's a really beautiful painting. The egg that's suspended from the shell above has always been a symbol that has been used from the beginning of Renaissance painting, the egg being the birth symbol. But in this painting, there are lots of little symbols scattered around, especially on the little chest down in the lower part. If you've noticed, he uses the one-point perspective to achieve the vastness of distance in the back part of his landscape. The Madonna is enthroned in some sort of architectural embellishments, and then there's a square rectangle cut from her interior that the Christ child, then a beautiful presentation of a little child, floats within that rectangle, and then there's the rectangular cavity within him also, so that you see straight through the people into the distance at the horizon level in the background. Slide, please. This was his large painting of the arrival of Columbus, and he shows Columbus as a youth mounting a sort of bank area here with rows of soldiers, Spanish soldiers, the Madonna floating on the banner, and sort of an allegorical thing that combines all aspects of the glory of Columbus discovering America. Slide, please. A large painting that's in the Metropolitan Museum collection that most people feel is not as successful as most of Dali's paintings is his Last Supper. And the interesting thing in this is that as a background, he uses Frank Lloyd Wright's chapel from the Big Sur country that looks out onto the Pacific as his architectural background for this, rather than the sort of Renaissance-type building that Leonardo da Vinci used in his Last Supper. But it's a fairly static piece of work. Slide, please. He did several crucifixes that are really outstanding. This one's in the Glasgow Museum collection, and it's as if you were in the place of God looking down at his son on the cross, back down to the world. this was another aspect of the dramatic use of perspective that many of the surrealist painters employ in their paintings. Slide, please. And another one of the crucifixes is the figure of Gala as the Madonna, again in the lower left-hand portion of the painting. And then the figure is suspended out in front of the cross with four sort of weird block shapes that, without visual support, actually do the supporting of the figure against the back of the cross. Slide, please. Again, one of his now you see it, now you don't sort of things. The hand that is holding the egg, again the symbol he uses over again, is sort of repeated in the same shape that you think might be rocks, but then it's a kneeling figure over to the left-hand side of the composition. Then almost repeats the bend of the index finger, the head bowed then is the egg shape, and the knee raised is the thumb in the foreground thing. So he repeats very basically much the same composition, doubling it in meaning. Slide, please. This is a bust of Voltaire, and this is very difficult for you to see. Some of you will see the bust, and some of you will see only the figure sort of coming in the doorway. But if you see the two ladies with the ruff, the two heads are Voltaire's eyes. The white space between the two heads become the nose, and then their dark dresses become the shadows underneath his nose. The arch then actually becomes the top of his head. And as the ladies come forward, the peculiar little stand on what would be the red rug then becomes the base for the sculpture to stand on. Slide, please. And a tribute to Delacroix, going back with the Arab paintings. Slide, please. And he's greatly interested in molecular structure, and he will do these things like in the lower right-hand portion of the army men that are facing with rifles toward one another, form molecular structures. Slide, please. The second artist that we look at is really entirely different, and yet he is still considered a surrealist painter, and his name is Marc Chagall, C-H-A-G-A-L-L. Now, where Dali was interested in precision, sort of the mysticism and technique, Chagall is interested in color, the beauty of color, and what paint can do in vibrant color. Chagall uses many more symbols, and symbols that repeat themselves over and over again in his paintings. Chagall is almost like a dream person, where time is shredded. There is no sequence of time in any of Chagall's paintings, like there's no sequence in a dream, that from one instant you can be one place and the next second the whole concept of the dream is changing. Some of these early paintings of Chagall's, and we also see his in chronological order, are some from folk tales. He's a Russian painter, basically of the Paris school of the 20th century, early 20th century. But there's some from Russian folk tales, actually, from his boyhood. Slide, please. Chagall's work is sort of crude in comparison to the refinement of Dali's work. But color will always play an important aspect in Chagall's paintings. This is also from an old Russian folk tale. Slide, please. Also, Chagall was Jewish and painted many things dealing with rabbis, the Jewish people, and especially the Russian Jews that his background came from. Slide, please. During a period of early Parisian work, Chagall sort of fractured his paintings, not especially in so much of an abstract way as to, say, fracture the scene itself to make it less believable, less of one time or of one place. So it becomes sort of abstract, and yet it is not abstract in the cubist sense of building up in planes of geometric shapes. Slide, please. Slide, please. This is an area that is very much a Chagall. He paints these sort of floating forms in very textured paint, slathering the paint on so that you have very rough edges. You have colors built on top of colors. The calla lilies, or bouquets of flowers, he uses quite a bit. The lovers embraced, floating in the skies, come again in many of his paintings. The floating violin, the sort of winged form up in the top may sometimes have a rooster's head on it. Floating fish playing violins, the goat form, are all symbols that Chagall uses, but real nice, rich color. Slide, please. Slide, please. Slide, please. These are still interspersed with the Russian folk tales. Slide, please. Here he does a picture of his Eiffel Tower with the chicken farm over on the far side, the angel sort of floating in the sun like it was his Icarus painting, and then the nude reclining in the lower portion as if dreaming up this whole subject that floats above her. Slide, please. Again, the Eiffel Tower shape. It's almost a pastoral country scene at the base. But these are very fanciful, free, imaginative paintings. Slide, please. This is one of his important paintings. It's called Of Time and the River. And it basically is the passage of time. The clock going over the river is a fairly literal symbol of time passing. Again, the embracing couple, which is a symbol of love to him, is over on the right bank, which is the conscious level. The fish we do not know the meaning of, with the arm extended from the mouth playing the violin, but music obviously had a great meaning to him. The color is not good on this slide. It is turned red. Slide, please. There are some just presentations, sort of fanciful things as Degas or Renoir would do. But Chagall loved color, and it's applied in very broad areas. Slide, please. Slide, please. Slide, please. Slide, please. This is a large painting that's in the Modern Art Museum in Paris. It's portraits. The man is sitting on top of the lady's shoulders, and everything sort of floats up skyward. Slide, please. This certainly embodies most of Chagall's symbols. The sun, the tower, the rooster's head, the couple, the violin, the goat also he uses quite often. It's in the upper section there. But it is all fragmented, piecemeal. sort of flung together, crusty outlines, thick paint. Slide, please. Slide, please. Slide, please. This was a design for a ballet set. I think probably one of the finest sets for a ballet was Stravinsky's Firebird, which Chagall did the backdrops for. They have been repainted. Well, many of the artists, Picasso, Dali, Chagall, Rouault, have done sets for ballets. In fact, Rouault did some very fine sets for a ballet called The Prodigal Son, which the New York City Ballet still uses. The Firebird of Stravinsky, which is a contemporary music piece, went right along with Chagall's paintings, and when the lights go up and the curtains open, the color just about blinds you. They're very fanciful costumes in that ballet also. Slide, please. But if you can imagine a set of a curtain 70 or 80 feet long and 40 feet high of a painting that captures the essence of all of Chagall's work, it's an outstanding piece. This is also from a ballet. Slide, please. Slide, please. Slide, please. I think as you look at Chagall's work, that his personal symbols that keep reappearing in the paintings. Also, I think you've probably noticed that nice peculiar shade of blue, a dark Prussian blue, he uses quite often counterbalanced with reds. Slide, please. Slide, please. And a great spontaneous feeling. There's a freshness and aliveness to his, in direct contrast with Dali's that seem very contrived, but appreciated just in an entirely different way. Slide, please. The acrobat. See the fish, his sun and moon symbols. Slide, please. Slide, please. He's done many versions of this, of the tremendous bouquet of flowers that fill the whole upper section of the painting, and then the couple or reclining woman in the bottom portion of it. As I've said, it's almost as if they're dreaming this whole composition. Slide, please. Slide, please. Clear the machine.
The artists that we have studied so far this semester, we started with the Impressionist Claude Monet, textured surfaces, bridges, the water lily ponds, the reflections, the beautiful reflections from his Gardens series. The second one was Edgar Degas, the ballet painter, also did horse races. Nightclub scenes was the linear, the draftsman of the Impressionist group. Studied with Ingres. Renoir painted the beautiful people of Paris society or middle-class society in the late 19th century. His ladies were fair-skinned, dark-eyed, auburn-colored hair, but there's a lush quality about the paint application and in the figures of his ladies. Redon, sort of a mystical painter of the 1890s, painted beautiful bouquets of flowers and did a whole series of lithographs of sort of weird creature-like animals with great big eyes in sort of symbolic dreamlike representations. Cézanne was a structurist, and he is considered a post-impressionist. He built his compositions or his forms on geometric objects, the cone, the cube, the cylinder, and applied his paint in little patches and sideways angular strokes. Also a post-impressionist was Paul Seurat, who introduced dots into painting. There was a whole group of pointillist painters that visually colors placed next to each other would blend to the eye. His paintings were very intellectually composed. Then Van Gogh, another post-impressionist, stretched out Seurat's dots into spaghetti lengths of paint. None of his paintings are very large. They're intimate scenes of the landscape, of things that he saw around him, household objects, and portraits. His friend, or a one-time friend, Paul Gauguin, was a banker in Paris and then became a painter, went to the South Seas to paint the beautiful colors of the natives. He based his paintings more on the Persian influence of flat colors, but very sensuous lines. Toulouse-Lautrec painted the lower life of Paris society, the dance halls, the laundresses that came to kick up their heels after a hard day work, but more or less in caricature of where the linear part of his painting is very important to his style. Whistler was an American expatriate, was basically in the French or European or Continental school. Very subtle, beautiful, quiet portraits, beautifully done. Henri Rousseau was what we call a primitive or a naive painter. Although a very sophisticated person, he was retired from the French army. He was in a French army band at one point in Mexico. And this is where many historians feel that he drew upon the Mexican landscape for his very inventive, creative jungle scenes that he painted in the latter part of his life. Amadeo Modigliani was also late 19th century into the 20th century artist in Paris, lived a very short life, dying of tuberculosis at an early age. But he stylized his figures into these oval heads, the long necks, but gave them great character and beautiful, lush color. Bonnard, which is considered one of the two intimists, and he's in early 20th century, but he's very strong on color. He would flood the canvas with washes of brilliant color, and then would paint on top of it so that the color would permeate the whole color scheme of his work. Most of them interior scenes, a lot of the women bathing. He includes his dachshund in many of his paintings. The other intimist painter was Edward Vuillard, who used a more earth tone color scheme. His work, although smaller usually in scale, is worked out in beautiful series of very simple shapes and patterns within these shapes. Henri Matisse flattened out everything, an abstract painter, brilliant colors. There are no shadows, or very little shadows, a lot of the blue outlining,